Hi, so now we're going to talk to some people that directly have to deal with the impact of COVID-19 and the access to the right information about the virus. And we're switching to a journalist. It's Kyrill Hartog, co-founder of the journalistic platform Are We Europe. Hi, Kyrill, welcome. Thank you for your time. Would you like to quickly introduce yourself and what Are We Europe is doing?
Hi, thanks for having me. Sure. So I'm one of the co-founders of RV Europe, as you said, and I'm also the editor-in-chief of the magazine. So basically what we do is we unite about 650 journalists that are spread out all over Europe onto our platform. That's our community. And we have different themes every 3 months. We have a quarterly magazine, but we also have a website, obviously, that focuses on Europe, but from a cultural perspective. So we don't do the institutions, we don't do EU policy. But it's really about European identity, the topics are really, really broad, but we do long-form multimedia journalism, so we enjoy doing a lot of podcasts, a lot of videos, and long reads.
Cool, interesting. So if you're that international or European network, probably the remoting wasn't that much of an issue to deal with, but COVID-19 impacted all of us, and I can imagine for you as journalists to get access to information and to report on it. Have you experienced any impact of the virus and the infodemic on your work as a journalist?
Well, I mean, the direct impact for our team was obviously that, our office got shut down. We had a co-working that sort of has been up in the air. Everyone has gone back to their home country, has been working remote. And it's been quite challenging to run a newsroom, even though we're not a huge newsroom, but still 10 people. At a distance, and you just miss some of that physical, creative brainstorm energy, I'd say. But then in terms of the work that we do, not much has changed, and we're actually quite lucky that we continue printing our magazine against all odds. We just released an issue called The Silver Lining, which is all about solidarity and positive actions around Europe as a response to COVID, and during a time when a lot of journalists, especially freelance journalists, are struggling, we managed to get the grants and the funds together to make that happen. So in a way, for Are We Europe as an organization, things are looking quite optimistic despite everything that's going on.
Okay, so there's positive news in this crisis as well. There's creativity too.
Yeah, definitely.
You've been reporting. What have you been exploring and discovering that is of interest to you in this pandemic?
So again, as I said, we felt like we needed to cover a more constructive angle. We felt like you're being washed with sort of death statistics, and I mean, it's obviously really important. We're not sugarcoating the reality, but we thought, hey, there's probably also a silver lining to this crisis, which is communities coming together. And so this issue is all about what can we learn from each other. So we've seen amazing NGO and volunteer networks trying to support women in Germany, sex workers, who have been really affected by the lockdown measures and who have no social safety net. But we also have an article investigating homeless people all over Europe, so comparing Greece to Germany to Sweden, and seeing, how can homeless street papers, which is often the only way for homeless people to have a livelihood, is to sell street papers. And obviously during the lockdown, nobody was in the street anymore to buy those papers. So all of these different articles, they touch upon how can we help the most vulnerable populations, and what can we learn from what people are doing in other European countries that may be replicated in other contexts.
So you're saying this virus had impact on the level of basically on street level, it had impact on the daily lives of people. But we also see that obviously this virus has been talked about and reported a lot about digitally and on the internet. The internet is a platform which divides and brings us together. Do you feel that the pandemic has caused an increase in spread of dividing news and potentially disinformation?
Yes, I mean, do I feel that is the case? I mean, the pitches that I've gotten definitely reflect that. I mean, first of all, my inbox has been literally flooded since this COVID has happened, because I think people are maybe they're spending more time at home, or maybe they want to write more about what's going on. Maybe journalists have less work. So in any case, my workload has kind of tripled as an editor, and most pitches actually focus on sort of what I just mentioned. So, hey, this is how the pandemic is affecting this particular group of people. You should know about it. We should report about it. But we've also had so many pitches on disinformation, fake news, sort of how the geopolitical angle of this, you know, how certain power players are making use of this situation to advance their agendas, and you know what that means for the future of privacy. Also, another angle that I've heard about a lot and that we're also covering in our next magazine is the contact tracing, you know, debate about how much privacy are we willing to sacrifice in these apps, you know, that track our movements, in order to be able to lift, you know, the confinement and to go back to a functioning economy. And how much are we sacrificing, and is it worth it? You know, is the cure worse than the disease? And these kinds of questions. But on disinformation specifically, yeah, we've got a really interesting investigative piece from the Baltics, from Lithuania, by a journalist who actually wanted to remain anonymous. So he's published with us under an alias, who goes quite deep into the sort of trolls and the pro-Kremlin people that are very active in that region, for reasons that we're all familiar with, because it's such an important frontline region, and because the Kremlin considers the Baltics as sort of part of the Soviet Empire that sort of needs to be recovered. And on the other hand, you've got the EU that is trying to defend in that ideological war. And what this journalist basically does is he talks to some of those pro-Kremlin people spreading misinformation. We've all heard those stories, the 5G, you know, conspiracy, that coronavirus was caused by 5G, but also other things like that it's related to the weather, or, you know, it goes from kind of reasonable to kind of bizarre. And then on the other hand, he talks about, you know, what the people who are trying to flag this disinformation, how they're trying to do it, and whether it's effective or not. So he talks to a group called the Elves in Lithuania, which is a Corona task force that was set up, and they've got a bunch of websites like the debunk.eu website, and they're being funded by, as I said, a lot of European and American organizations. But it all comes down to actually quite a lot of volunteers spending hours and hours on social media every day and flagging posts that seem, you know, like they're not super trustworthy. And you know, according to the author of this article, it is effective to the extent that that 95% of the posts that they flag are also then taken down by Facebook and the platforms. But of course, on the other hand, the issue that they're facing is that every time that you identify something as fake news or disinformation, you're also unwillingly helping the spread of it, you know, and so I thought that was a very interesting finding.
You're amplifying the message in a way.
Yeah, exactly.
You were talking about a flood of information in your inbox, and as a journalist, it's your task to provide different angles and to report on news in a complex way so that people get the right access to information. How do you make sure you're not yourself are not spreading disinformation if there's such a flood of information generally?
I'm very happy you asked that, because it's much harder for a small media organization such as the one I work for. Because normally, if you're talking about the big media, they will have fact-checking teams, and every piece, hopefully, you'd hope, that gets published goes through a very strict check, and all the sources are checked. And we're obviously understaffed, and we're working with a lot of people who have very limited experience. So the way that I try to overcome that issue is by first of all, it starts with the edits. Like every time a statistic is mentioned, you know, I have to ask the source, and then I need a hyperlink, and then I check it before especially for the print magazine, before we print it. But there's been some close calls recently, like the article I was talking about that was about sex workers in Germany. You know, we almost published it, and then last minute, one of our editors said, hey, this woman seems kind of biased. You know, there was this interview with this woman, and we started Googling her, and turns out she's a massive, she's a feminist activist who believes that, you know, prostitution should be illegal. So she has a very clear political agenda. And we were going to run that piece as if she was like a neutral expert or a witness. And so I think part of what a journalist needs to do is to keep asking those questions, like, is the person that you're talking to, the person that you're interviewing, the person you're getting your information from, do they have an agenda? Because everyone has an agenda. And even think tanks that claim to be scientific and neutral, they have, you know, a business model, and they're funded by often political interests. So I'm not saying everything is fake news, but I'm also not saying that you should take everything for granted that an expert says.
So if I can summarize it, you're talking about it's very important to check your sources, to be careful where the news is coming from and what political stands or ideological stands or motivations your sources have. Fact-checking with the else might be a tool that can help take down information which is false. But at the same time, you also express that it might amplify the message, and we know about troll activity. Actually, there's 2 states or 2 regions, European Union and Russia, maybe having geopolitical reasons. Do you think it's enough to just check your sources or fact check, or what should be done to prevent this spread of disinformation more widely?
It's definitely not enough, and I think media literacy is an obvious one that we talk about it a lot, but I think that I think we're underestimating how many people are, you know, and the only example I know is my mother, you know, who has a university degree, and, you know, she's capable of critical thinking. So she's not even like the best target for fake news. But I've even caught her on YouTube at 11 at night, you know, before going to bed, watching videos that I know have been sort of fueled by this algorithm, where, you know, she probably started on something that was very reasonable, and she ended up on a video that's saying how, like, climate change is part of some sort of natural ice age cycle. And then you look at the person who's, you know, spreading that news, and it's clear that they're a climate change denier. But yet nowhere it says that, you know, on YouTube. There's no logo, there's no flag, there's nothing to say, hey, this person might be selling you their version of the truth. So media literacy is a huge thing. I think we should start teaching kids in school at an early age. The more dependent we become on social media, and the more information is curated by these massive platforms that also, by the way, aren't neutral. If you look at the Twitter versus Facebook versus Google debate, they all have different stances on, you know, which information to take down, what freedom of information means, whether a post that denies the Holocaust is bad enough to take down or not. So I think, yeah, media literacy is probably my most obvious answer.
All right, Kyrill, thank you. So you just listened to Kyrill, and to summarize it, it's important to, as journalists, to flag the information, or sorry, not to flag the information, to check your sources. And fact checkers might be able, through content moderation, to flag wrong information. Also, it's very important to check up on your mother, what she's watching on YouTube, which altogether just shows and shows the complexity of this topic. The next weeks, we're going to talk more about disinformation, how it relates to COVID-19, and thank you for being here, Kyrill. Sorry, and let's keep each other updated.
Thanks so much.